the New York Times ran a smear piece, and CNN smeared Tulsi on the eve of this last debate, right? So here's from the New York Times. An independent analysis of the Russian news media found that RT, the Kremlin-backed news agency, mentioned Miss Gabbard frequently for a candidate polling in single digits, according to data collected by the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Now, we showed you before that New York Times and the Washington Post would write all these articles about Russian bots, and they were basing it on research done by a group called New Knowledge. And then we showed you on this news show, that New Knowledge was completely corrupted. So much so that Facebook banned their founder from Facebook because he posted so much fake news. So every time you read something like this in the New York Times, you go, well, who's their source? But nobody ever checks their source because they just think the New York Times is using a credible source. They're not. The New York Times used New Knowledge, completely discredited, bullshit, fabricating false statements and false data organization. That's New Knowledge. That's what New York Times, Washington Post, and NBC News used to smear Tulsi Gabbard 6 months ago. And now they're using stuff from the Alliance for Securing Democracy, and they call them a group that seeks to track and expose efforts by authoritarian regimes and undemocratic elections. They also quoted Laura Rosenberger, a former policy aide to Mrs. Clinton's campaign.
Oh, good.
She's the director of the Alliance. She sees Ms. Gabbard as a potentially useful vector for Russian efforts to sow division within the Democratic Party. So I told you that, and so now they would use this Russiagate against anybody who goes against their wars. So when everybody started pushing this, we're everywhere. New York Times, Washington Post, Intercept, Young Turks, everybody pushed it. I told everybody who would listen that this is going to come back to hurt progressives, not conservatives, not liberals, not the war machine. And here it is. At the bottom it says, the Russian activity could be part of a longer-term effort to drive a wedge among Democrats. This messaging has echoes of 2016. See, just like in 2016, Trump, Russia, now Tulsi Gabbard, Russia. And, of course, Max Blumenthal points out, sickening New York Times hit job. They try to link Tulsi Gabbard to Russia through an independent analysis by the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Who is the Alliance for Securing Democracy? Well, we already know it's headed by a Hillary Clinton staffer. And we already know the Alliance is a disinformation shop run out of the German Marshall Fund, which is backed by the U.S. government. So we've already exposed the U.S. Marshall Fund funds these places over in the U.K. that push Russiagate and smear people who are telling the truth about it and who are anti-war. That's the government funding smears against citizens who are against government policy. That's who the Alliance is. That's who the New York Times. The New York Times doesn't tell you that. Why? Because the New York Times is fake fucking news, baby. And they always were, and they always are. That's why I have a show. Because of crap like this. So there you go. So that's who the New York Times is using as their source. They were using New Knowledge, completely discredited. Got caught lying about and inventing Russian bots and saying and attributing them to the Republicans. They were making it up. You never hear that story reported in the news. But except for places, you'll hear it here, places like here, and places like the Gray Zone Project. That's about it. And that's why Aaron Mate won an award for his Russiagate debunking, which he said he shares with this show. So I just say it's mine. I won an award. How about that? So there you go. That's the New York Times. Now, do you understand when Trump says fake news, it lands? Why? Because they often are, especially anything to do with foreign policy, war, or Tulsi Gabbard, or progressives. So now we move on to CNN. Here's Bakari Sellers. Here's what he says about, this is right on CNN, the most trusted name in news. Watch.
But he's got another knee. She gets one knee, he's got another knee.
There is a chance that Tulsi's not just working for the United States of America, but I digress. So,
oh, wait a minute. What does that mean?
That's not just an allegation. I firmly believe that.
Message is coming now.
No, here I know. Watch the bots come on Twitter now. I firmly believe that Tulsi.
I like how they're all giggling about it. Hey, what's the matter? I like how they're all giggling about it. Hey, a sitting U.S. congressperson and a currently serving major in the armed forces is working for another country. I just said it on CNN. And everyone giggles. They don't go, if you can't back that up with facts, you're never going to be allowed back on CNN. You know that, right? No. They laugh about it. That's a current sitting U.S. congressperson and a currently serving major in the U.S. Armed Forces. Currently. She commands troops. She's a major. You don't think the people under her watch CNN and go, oh, is my major a traitor to our country? And of course, they have no facts to back that up. That's just them smearing her. And watch what CNN does.
Tulsi Gabbard stands on that stage is the antithesis to what the other 11 individuals stand for, especially when it comes to issues such as foreign policy. There is no question. Yeah. There is no question that Tulsi Gabbard, of all the 12, is a puppet for the Russian government.
So now that guy's working. When you watch something like this, it makes you think, oh, so he's probably working directly with the CIA. And if he's not, why would he say that stuff? So, we know that the CIA has infiltrated the news media. They've never stopped. The Church Committee investigated in the 70s. It was ubiquitous, and that didn't put an end to it. It's not stopping. So why would he say that about a sitting U.S. congressperson? And again, that whole thing about, this is how you can reveal that they're liars and just smear merchants. If they really thought Trump was in a Putin puppet and a puppet of a foreign government, why would they give him $80 billion more to go run the military? Hey, here's $80 billion. You and Putin go do what you guys want with it. It's because they don't think that. But Tulsi stands up to these wars that he's pushing because he's being paid to push them. And that's the face of a red-baiting traitor to our country. That's what Bakari Sellers is. And he should not be allowed on television or in polite society ever again. But of course, he's smearing people and lying. He's a liar. And he's lying at the behest of the establishment. So there's never a price to pay. In fact, everyone giggled. So what Tulsi decided to do, and that's when she says that the media is rigging the primary, that's what she's talking. I think that's what she's talking about. She might be talking about other things, but the coverage of the news, they're the ones who shape the agenda in America. And they're rigging it already. Look how they're rigging it against her. And so this is what she said right to their faces during the debate. This was great.
New York Times and CNN have also smeared veterans like myself for calling for an end to this regime change war. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times put out an article saying that I'm a Russian asset and an Assad apologist and all these different smears. This morning, a CNN commentator said on national television that I'm an asset of Russia. Completely despicable.
Despicable.
Let's bring in Rebecca Heinrich.
Completely despicable. And so I was watching I wonder how Fox is going to cover this. So I covered it, and they say exactly what you think they're going to say. They're like, so whenever the Democrats don't like somebody, whenever the liberals don't like somebody, they just call them a Russian, just like they did with Trump. Do you see how this doesn't play with more than half the country? This only plays with the Democrats and liberal class. This doesn't play with independents. Like I told you, 50% of independents, which is the biggest voting bloc, have a positive approval of Donald Trump. And they all see this for what it is. They're not fooling people. This is Hillary Clinton 2016 all over again. You just throw slime everywhere. So there you go. So that was a great when she did that. Despicable. And she's looking right at them. And look who they have on the debate stage anyway. They have they have an editor from the New York Times, which is, again, piece of shit rag, lies us into every war, and smears people who tell the truth about war. That's what the New York Times is. So fuck them. Then they have Erin Burnett from CNN. She came right from fucking Goldman Sachs to CNN. You know that? Do you know her husband is like the managing partner of frickin' Goldman Sachs? She's their anchor. No conflict of interest. And then the next person over is, who better to ask questions on behalf of the regular Americans than Anderson Cooper, a member of the Vanderbilt family. You know that guy. He has a great story. He has a classic riches to riches story. Anderson Cooper used to work for the CIA. He got out of the CIA and he's like, you know what? I'm going to quit that CIA stuff. And I'm just going to go into news now. Because those years at the CIA made me want to do news. So that's what we got. So there you go. It was good. It was good to see. And of course, the news media still smeared her. They kept smearing her. So I want to remind you, as Julian Assange has told us, that the Saudi government is funding ISIS. Okay? And Al-Qaeda. Here we go. Watch this.
There's a early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, this is I think this is the most significant email in the whole collection. And perhaps because Saudi and Qatari money is spread all over the place, including into many media institutions. All serious analysts know, even the US government has mentioned or agreed with that some Saudi figures have been supporting ISIS, funding ISIS. But the dodge has always been that's it's just some rogue princes using their cut of the oil money to do whatever they like, but actually the government disapproves. But that email says that no, it is the governments of Saudi and the government and Qatar that have been funding ISIS.
The Saudi.
Okay, that's just a little background information, just so you know. Isn't that crazy? We're sending troops to guard Saudi's oil, and they're funding ISIS? United States also armed ISIS, and, here's a little bit of it. Here's an interview with General Flynn.
2012, your agency was saying, quote, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. In 2012, the US was helping coordinate arms transfers to those same groups. Why did you not stop that?
Did you hear that? That's in 2012. They all agreed that the people who were doing the insurgency in Syria was the Salafists. And Al-Qaeda, who's that? That's ISIS, that's the most extreme members and terrorists. And he just said, and then you were coordinating arms to them. Why would you do that? So this is common knowledge that not only, or it should be, for people who want to know, it's common knowledge that Saudi Arabia funds ISIS. We also did, and we provided arms to them in Syria. Yes. And Libya, too. Here we go. Watch.
If you're worried about the rise of quote-unquote Islamic extremism.
I hate to say it's not my job, but my job was to ensure that the accuracy of our intelligence that was being presented was as good as it could be.
The administration turned a blind eye to your analysis.
I don't know if they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision.
A willful decision to go support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim
Brotherhood. A willful decision to do what they're doing.
Willful decision to provide arms to Al-Qaeda and Salafists. That's the terrorists, baby. That's what we're doing. So again, we're doing it. He's going to admit it right here that Saudi funds them. Watch.
It really comes down to building a coalition so that what the Arab Muslim world sees is them rejecting ISIS, not
They
us
already
defeating them.
reject ISIL. Do you know any major Arab ally that embraces ISIL?
I know major Arab allies who fund them.
Yeah, but
There you go. I know major Arab allies, meaning Qatar, Saudi Arabia, who funds ISIL. They don't tell you this. They won't tell you this. So it's the smearing of Tulsi kept going even after she had confronted New York Times and CNN. This is how bad journalism is. This is why I don't want to be in journalism, because 99% of them are just establishment tools and career climbers, and they'll say anything for money. Well, here's one of them. This guy, Scott Stedman. He's a journalist and founder of ForensicNews.net and author of Real News. Really, he's got 90,000 followers. He tweeted this out. It is a fact, he says, that the Russian talking point for years has been that the United States arms al-Qaeda in Syria. Tulsi Gabbard just said it on national television. He's just making that up. That's obviously, I just showed you it's not true. It's obviously not true. I've had generals admitting it. So here is Max Blumenthal also points out that this is from a video published by HTS, Al-Qaeda in Syria. And it shows one of its fighters firing a U.S.-supplied tow missile in West Aleppo. The CIA-backed FSA was a weapons farm for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That's not a Russian talking point. It's a fact. So how much money does this guy get from the CIA to say this? Because the CIA's got their, if you read the WikiLeaks, they get all kinds of people on their page. So they get celebrities like Ellen, Moby. You can't believe all the people. And it's much easier. They say it's much easier to buy a newsman than it is to buy a whole news organization. So I wonder what this guy's getting out of that. I wonder how much money. I wonder. Because he's obviously 100% wrong, and he can't be that stupid not to know this, right? Like if he's a journalist, this is what he's doing. He decides to tweet about it, and he has no knowledge of it. Of course, he has knowledge of it. So why would he lie like this? Why is he taking money? Who's paying him? Those are the questions we should ask of people like this. Because by the way, and check this out. Even CNN knows Al-Qaeda got the guns. Are they Russian puppets too? And there's a story from CNN. It says U.S. arms sold to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates end up in the wrong hands. The U.S. sold weapons to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and now they're in the hands of the Al-Qaeda and the Iranian-backed fighters in Yemen. Here's Aaron Matei, award-winning journalist who got an award doing his debunking of Russiagate. You know anybody else who won an award for their Russiagate coverage? No. Because they were all wrong. The only one who got it right was this guy, and he got an award for it. He says, notice that no one will refute Tulsi's claim that the United States weapons support helped al-Qaeda in Syria because it's true. And so it's weird. Like, what's in it for guys like that to lie? What's in it for guys like this to lie? Why is Scott Stedman lying like that? That's weird. It didn't stop there. Here's another one. Susan Glasser. She writes for the, I think, New York Magazine. Could you look up what she writes for? I think it's New York Magazine. We'll get it. She says, how odd to listen to Tulsi Gabbard mouthing Syrian and Russian talking points at the Democratic debate stage. So you can't tell me that this isn't a coordinated effort by the intelligence community and their minions in the press. That's what it looks like. I mean, you can tell me that it's not that, but it looks exactly like that.
The New Yorker.
For the New York, she writes for the New Yorker. So that's just weird. It's weird that they would all say this. She says, how odd to listen to Tulsi Gabbard mouthing Syrian and Russian talking points on the Democratic debate stage. Sorry, but no one thinks U.S. troops withdrawn by Trump were there as part of a regime change war. by the U.S. It's as untruthful as anything from the president of the United. She's smearing Tulsi as saying she's just as big a liar as Trump. She's telling the truth.
Susan Glasser is also the editor at Politico, and she previously served as editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine and editor at the Washington Post and Roll Call.
So Washington Post, she works. So this, you see who she works for? She worked for the richest man in the world. I don't think, is that a bad guy to get? Who's in bed with the CIA? Is that a bad guy to get your news from? So do you see how it's one big club and you ain't in it? It's one big intelligence community club. She's wrong about it 1,000%. She used to be the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, so she knows. So what she's doing is pushing. They're propagandists. Susan Glasser is 100% propagandist. And again, no, I don't know how much money she's getting to say stuff like this, or what kind of money, or if she's getting money directly to say stuff like this. But why else would you say it? She used to work for. Now you know that they're all owned by 6 corporations. Every fucking one of these outlets she worked for.
You know, and she's an alumni of Harvard, so they must be proud.
So I just tweeted this out. I said, how typical for a pro-war corporate reporter to get the war in Syria 100% wrong. And of course, Red Bait, a current major in the Army at the same time. These are the same people sent to convince us WMDs were real and Iraq was a real threat. They're garbage reporters and worse people. Yes, she is definitely, if she considers herself a journalist, which I know she does, she's a garbage journalist. And a worse person. So here's another one. This is CNN's national security analyst. Watch what she says. Yes, and then to criticize CNN commentators for calling her a Russian asset?
How dare she?
How dare she?
Clutch those pearls.
Clutch those pearls. CNN calls her a Russian asset and Assad apologists all the time. It's nice to know this is how the elite treat veterans who have actually seen war. Anyway, here's the smear article from the New York Times. And let me just say this. Do you remember when during the campaign in 2016 when Trump was going after that Gold Star family? And what Gold Star family is someone who's lost their child in war, a soldier who died. That's a Gold Star family. And Trump was going after them. People are like, oh my God, Trump is the worst. How could he do that? They're doing it to a soldier who's alive serving right now in those fucking bullshit wars that they lied us into. She volunteered because she thought they weren't lying. And now she serves as a medic in those bullshit wars. And they still smear her. Even someone willing to volunteer to go to those bullshit wars, they still smear her if she tells a little bit of truth about them. That's who this person, that's who Sam, what is her name? Sam Vinograd is. That's who Susan Glasser is. These are garbage people who are paid to push war and smear an active major in the currently serving and a current senator. I mean, congresswoman. They don't care. They're no better than Trump. They're worse than Trump because you know what? Trump doesn't pretend he's a good person. They do. By the way, here's Ben Norton to correct. He says, no, Gabbard is correct. The U.S. was illegally militarily occupying the northeast third of Syria. And what is that part of the country? What is it known for? Oh, it's 90% of its oil production took place in that northeast part of Syria where the United States was occupying illegally. It's also their fertile breadbasket. The U.S. was holding Syria's oil and wheat hostage as a weapon to destabilize its government. So yes, those soldiers were there in part of a regime change effort. Yes, they were. That's from the Washington Post. The president's Syria policy is even more contradictory than usual. In Syria, we took the oil. Now Trump wants to give it to Iran. That's the headline. So, yes, those soldiers were there. And yes, so and then I linked to the video. Do you remember Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who has achieved the highest level of honor you can at Columbia University? He has the highest level of professor you can be at the Columbia University. This is a quote from him. Syria is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. Syria is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. The CIA and Saudi Arabia tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. It brought in ISIS and Russia. What we should do now is get out. And so people go, yeah, but he's getting out. He's going to let the Turks are going to be slaughtered. The Turks. Well, what I said about the Turks, again, if I know it in my garage, you goddamn well know they know it. The Turks had to stop making alliances with the United States and start making alliances with the people whose country they're in. They're in Syria. So they should make an alliance with Bashar al-Assad for protection. Not the United States, who doesn't live there and is eventually going to leave. Just like we left them before. There's a pattern to us leaving them. You know who left them last time? Reagan. And now Trump is doing it. But it's worse this time because Trump is doing it. But what happened after Trump pulled out? As we said, the only solution in Syria was the Kurdish-led SDF-YPG forming an alliance with the Syrian government. And that's exactly what they have done. The Syrian army is deploying to the northern cities of Kobani and Manbij to push back the Turkish invasion. And that's a Reuters article. Syrian army to enter SDF-held Kobani and Manbij. The Lebanese broadcaster said that on Sunday the Syrian army would deploy within 48 hours. So here's a guy named Clint Watts, blue check writer. Clint Watts tweets out, Tulsi Gabbard's take on Syria is completely false. The U.S. did not start the war in Syria, nor did we initiate a regime change. Now, those are two blatant lies. I just showed you Jeffrey Sachs, the smartest guy at the Columbia University, laid it out that the CIA and Saudi Arabia, started this war. Now, so Clint Watts is a bald-faced liar. Now, who's paying him to say these things? I don't know. Is he working for the CIA directly? I don't know. Is he getting money indirectly from the CIA or the military-industrial complex? We don't know. It looks likely because he tweets out lies like this, and he calls himself a writer. Or a journalist, right? He says the U.S. did not start the war in Syria, nor did we initiate a regime change. Those two, provably, I can prove you false in my garage. I already did. The U.S. did not back al-Qaeda in Syria. Again, why didn't the moderators or other candidates challenge her on these falsehoods? Because they're real. Because they're not falsehoods. They're actually facts and true. And if they did, then everybody would then start fact-checking and they'd find out the truth about Syria. And that's not what anybody on CNN wants. And that's not what a guy like you wants, Clint Watts. And who is Clint Watts? Here's something Max Blumenthal goes, did you write this, bro? In Foreign Affairs magazine, it said, this is something Clint Watts, who was coming at Tulsi, he wrote this, the good and bad of Ahrar al-Sham, an al-Qaeda-linked group worth befriending. And who wrote it? Clint Watts. There's some al-Qaeda groups that we should be befriending. And so just so you know who the alliance is, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, it's fronted by neocon and Dem interventionist apparatchiks who aim to censor alternative media, destroy anti-war politicians by linking them to Russia. Look under the hood of this disinformation operation, and the intelligence community's role becomes clear. And at the bottom, it says Facebook censorship of alternative media, just the beginning. German Marshall Fund. That's funded by the U.S. government, and they're doing it to censor people. Oh, by the way, here is also Clint Watts. The Alliance for Securing Democracy was conceived by Clint Watts, a disinformation warrior who states his aim to quell information rebellions. He cooked up a dashboard that tracks Russian bots that turned out to be real people. And, of course, they outed him. Meet Clint Watts. It says dubious Russian meddling expert lobbying U.S. government with a sketchy past in the counterterrorism swamp. Supposed Russian expert Clint Watts has suggested media censorship as a remedy to Kremlin interference. So this is a guy who's doing the bidding of the CIA and the military-industrial complex to suppress people who are telling the truth about stuff like Syria. And that's why he tweets out completely BS lies about what's happening in Syria. Clint Watts is also a CIA contributor who published this study with John Brennan. But according to the New York Times, this character's U.S. government-backed outfit produces independent analysis. So that New York Times story smearing Tulsi Gabbard said this organization produces independent. Do you see how garbage the New York Times is? You see what garbage these people are? This guy, Clint Watts, what a garbage person he is? As I reported, disinformation warrior Clint Watts was not only behind the Hamilton 68 scam that branded real people as Russian bots, but he is a CIA contributor now seeking to undermine a domestic U.S. lawmaker's presidential campaign. That's who these people are.
You know, a fun fact about Clint is he went to West Point.
Oh, no kidding.
That's a fun fact.
So if you think the CIA has stopped infiltrating, that there are the media. That's why they suck so bad. That's why they're willing to smear a currently serving major in the U.S. Army and a sitting U.S. congressperson. Remember when they pretended Gold Star families, you can't do that? Oh, my God, our military, they're so precious. We respect. Oh, except if they're saying the truth about Syrian war, then smear them. And that's who these people are. And that's who the people at CNN are. And that's who the people at the New York Times are. And I don't say this lightly. This isn't hyperbole. They are garbage people, and they do garbage news. They do straight-up propaganda. That guy Clint Watts, that woman from the New Yorker.
Susan Glasser,
Bakar, those guys are straight-up propagandists. Anderson Cooper, Aaron Burnett, they're straight-up propagandists. Anderson Cooper worked for the CIA for 2 years. And then he said, I'm done with that. I want to do news. Straight up propaganda. And now you know why people get their news from YouTube. And now you know why I get smeared by CNN. Now you know why I get smeared by, that's great. It feels good, though, when they do it, by the Washington Post. Now you know why Neera Tanden, the most well-moneyed Democratic think tank in Washington, comes at me on Twitter on the regular, because they're allergic to the truth. The truth, no matter where it comes from, is their kryptonite. Whether it comes from Max Blumenthal, Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, or a dumb jagoff nightclub comedian in his garage, they're allergic to the truth, and they gotta squash it. So, of course, whatever the establishment media is saying is more pro-war BS. Of course it is. And of course they're just smearing Tulsi. And of course that's what she's right when she says they're rigging the election. Because they're rigging it with their coverage. They're rigging it with the people they choose to ask the questions. You got you know that Anderson Cooper is worth $100 million before he gets his inheritance? These are the people asking questions. And they're on CNN, which is that they smear Tulsi on the regular. You don't think that's exactly what she's talking about, how they rigged the debates, and she's right. How they rigged the election, she's right. Are Our next live Jimmy Dore show is November 5th in Buffalo, New York, November 17th in Philadelphia, and December 27th in Honolulu. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all of our live shows and become a patron or a Jimmy Dore Show member at jimmydorecomedy.com/join and support the show. We give you hours of bonus content every week. Thanks for your support.